Black mail-order bride rejected for her color, until a millionaire farmer saw her as his perfect. You are Amara Wilson. The gentleman gulped nervously, his complexion draining of color, as though he had encountered a specter in full sunlight. This arrangement won't succeed. You failed to disclose that you were of African descent. Amara completed what Harold Pierce couldn't force himself to articulate, her spirits plummeting as she remained at the railway platform, the delicate bonnet she had purchased specifically for this occasion now appearing like an absurd accessory amid the shame. 21 days of journey, half a year of heartfelt correspondence, a chest containing aspirations, and the prospect of a fresh start away from the bigotry of metropolitan areas. Everything collapsed within moments the instant Harold finally observed her appearance. In your correspondence, your writing was so eloquent. I envisioned, he faltered, stepping backward, the flower arrangement clearly deteriorating in his perspiring grip. Why couldn't you have informed me? Amara inhaled deeply, collecting every fragment of self-respect she possessed. Inform you of what precisely? That my complexion is as dark as midnight, yet my emotions are as genuine as your own. You never inquired. Harold glanced about anxiously, observing the inquisitive stares of travelers and railway workers. In the small community of Riverbrook, an elegantly dressed black lady was already drawing notice. A black lady being openly spurned by a white gentleman created an irresistible display. You must comprehend my circumstances, the society here, my enterprise, he mumbled, retreating further. I can arrange payment for your return journey. You appear well educated. I'm confident you'll comprehend. Amara experienced a shiver along her backbone, not from sorrow, but from a restrained fury that burned quietly. In his correspondence, Harold had described the solitary heart of a 45-year-old widower who yearned for companionship, comprehension, and another opportunity at romance. Never once did he mention that this heart maintained racial preferences. I exhausted my entire fortune to arrive here, she stated, her tone unwavering despite her internal tremors. I possess nowhere to return to. Harold retrieved some wrinkled currency from his pocket. This amount should provide lodging for several days until you resolve matters. That's when a resonant voice sliced through the strained atmosphere like lightning on a cloudless afternoon. Is that your remedy, Pierce? Cast money at difficulties and hope they disappear as they consistently do. A towering figure emerged behind Harold, his intense gaze focused on the merchant who suddenly appeared diminished. He wore plain yet obviously costly garments, the type of simplicity that only the genuinely affluent can manage to exhibit. His weathered countenance revealed a lifetime spent outdoors, yet his bearing radiated undeniable command. This matter doesn't concern you, Maxwell, Harold responded, though his voice revealed his insecurity. It becomes my business when I observe a man I've known for 15 years acting like a weakling. The individual called Maxwell addressed Amara, his expression becoming gentler. Miss, permit me to present myself. Alexander Maxwell, I own property just beyond the town. Amara acknowledged formally, remaining wary. Through experience, she understood that strangers' kindness frequently carried hidden costs. If I may be presumptuous, Alexander proceeded, I extend lodging at my residence until you determine your future plans. We maintain guest chambers that remain rarely occupied, and my housekeeper would appreciate having companionship. Harold visibly reacted to the proposition. Maxwell, you cannot be earnest. What will the community think? Alexander displayed a frigid smile that never touched his eyes. The identical people who conduct business with me daily. The identical people who rely on my property for their survival. I'm interested to discover what they might express. Harold became even paler, grasping the implied warning. Alexander Maxwell wasn't merely a farmer. He was the landowner possessing half the fertile territory in the area. What nobody at that station could anticipate was that while Amara hesitated between injured pride and practical needs, she transported not only a trunk of garments, but also a mystery that would permanently alter the power dynamics in that small settlement. A mystery that would cause Harold Pierce to deeply regret the day he determined that skin tone defined a person's value. If this tale of bias and honor moved your emotions, Remember to follow the channel to discover how a humiliating rejection would transform into the spark for a reversal nobody would ever forget. The Maxwell property was not simply a farm on the periphery, as its proprietor had humbly characterized it. It was an impressive Victorian residence surrounded by acres of flourishing plantations and verdant meadows where purebred horses wandered peacefully. As Alexander's vehicle passed through the elaborate entrance, Amara felt simultaneously amazed and doubtful. Residents here aren't accustomed to diversity, Alexander clarified as he indicated the primary residence. Riverbrook was established by conventional families who remained conveniently trapped in former times. Harold Pierce represents merely a sign of a more profound illness. The housekeeper, Mrs. Foster, a mature woman with compassionate eyes and a rigid stance, welcomed Amara with professional politeness. If she was startled by the arrival of a black visitor, she concealed it. "I've arranged the blue chamber, the one with the finest garden view," she mentioned, guiding Amara through corridors adorned with invaluable artwork and antiques. At the evening meal that night, served in the grand dining area, Alexander shared his background. The offspring of a northern banker and an educator who had supported abolitionist movements, he had inherited not merely wealth but also firm beliefs about equality. When he relocated to Riverbrook 15 years prior, he had been considered peculiar, too wealthy to be excluded, but too unconventional to be fully embraced. "And what is your history, Miss Wilson?" he eventually inquired after describing his various businesses. "Your correspondence must have impressed Harold for him to extend such a formal proposal." Amara paused, but something about Alexander's straightforward approach encouraged trust. "I am an educator. I was an instructor in Boston. I taught literature and history at an academy for girls of color. When the institution closed due to insufficient funding, I recognized I needed to begin anew elsewhere." What Amara didn't reveal was the actual reason behind her correspondence, the surprising inheritance from her grandfather, a man who had devoted his entire existence as a servant for a wealthy household. An inheritance that contained not only carefully preserved gold pieces, but also historical documents that could alter the destiny of certain properties in the Riverbrook area, papers she had concealed in a secret compartment of her trunk. In the following days, Alexander provided Amara something precious, time to contemplate. The mansion's library was a repository of knowledge, and she devoted herself to books on regional history, geography, and the area's legal codes. When questioned about her pursuits, she would merely smile and mention she was expanding her understanding. A week following her arrival, word of her presence had circulated throughout the small community. Visits to the Maxwell mansion suddenly multiplied. Inquisitive neighbors, merchant spouses, even the local minister, all suddenly recalling urgent matters to address with Alexander. Observe that Alexander grumbled during afternoon refreshments after a particularly transparent delegation had departed. "You've become the local curiosity without even entering the town." Amara smiled with bitterness. "I've always been a curiosity, Mr. Maxwell. The distinction is that now I hold a china teacup in my hand while being observed." It was during one of these visits that Harold Pierce finally gathered courage to appear. He arrived unexpectedly, hat in hand, his face displaying false worry. "Maxwell," he greeted uneasily. "I simply came to verify if Miss Wilson is settled." "Absolutely content," Alexander responded sarcastically. "Why don't you inquire with her directly?" Harold's complexion drained as Amara entered the space, wearing one of the refined gowns Mrs. Foster had modified for her. No longer the weary, humiliated woman from the station, but a lady who moved with assurance and intention. "Mr. Pierce," she acknowledged him coldly. What an unforeseen surprise. "Miss Wilson." Harold fidgeted with his hat nervously. "I came that as the community is worried about my situation concerning your circumstances." "How thoughtful of them." Harold glanced at Alexander. "It's improper for an unmarried lady to remain in the home of an unmarried gentleman, particularly when she's black," Alexander concluded, his voice threateningly quiet. "Continue, Pierce. I'm intrigued to hear how you plan to complete that statement." Harold swallowed nervously. "The church committee is evaluating options to assist her return to Boston. A collection is being arranged." Amara smiled, the type of smile that didn't reach her eyes. How charitable. But I'm afraid my intentions have altered. I plan to remain in Riverbrook permanently. Harold's eyes expanded. That's inconceivable. You don't know anyone here. You have no employment, no relatives. I have employment, Amara responded serenely. Mr. Maxwell has graciously offered me the role of librarian on his property. Apparently, generations of Maxwells have gathered books without ever organizing them correctly. Harold stared at Alexander with a combination of shock and barely restrained fury. You cannot be serious. Alexander shrugged. I've never been more earnest. Miss Wilson is educated and capable. My library has never been in superior hands. What Harold didn't comprehend as he stumbled through increasingly weak objections was the true importance of that position. The Maxwell Library didn't merely contain literary classics. It also housed property records, legal papers, and a complete chronicle of the area, including details that many traditional families would prefer to keep hidden. When Harold finally departed, defeated and enraged, Alexander observed from the window as he rushed across the grounds. He'll attempt to complicate your life, he observed. The small humiliation you imposed on his pride today will not be forgotten. Amara nodded, a new resolve gleaming in her eyes. Let him attempt it. While he's occupied spreading petty gossip, I'll be investigating much deeper than he ever conceived. What Harold Pierce couldn't understand, what nobody in Riverbrook could imagine, was that the hours Amara devoted in the library had a very particular objective. Among yellowed papers and dusty records, she was starting to assemble a puzzle that would expose an uncomfortable reality. Riverbrook's traditional founding families, including the Pierces, had constructed their wealth on property that did not legitimately belong to them. And while the local community buzzed with speculation about the woman of color residing at the Maxwell mansion, Amara was quietly preparing for a disclosure that would disturb the community to its foundation. 2 weeks afterward, the small assembly room of Riverbrook's town hall was packed. An urgent summons had gathered the founding families, local businessmen, and farmers from throughout the area. At the center of the disturbance, Harold Pierce gestured frantically, his face crimson with outrage. It's in scandal. Maxwell is openly challenging our customs by maintaining that woman on his land. Respectable families are troubled about rumors of improper conduct. As whispers of agreement spread through the room, the doors opened wide. Alexander Maxwell entered composedly, followed by Amara Wilson, who walked with the grace of royalty. An uneasy silence descended upon the room. I value the invitation, Alexander stated, his voice strong, reaching every section of the hall. Though I must clarify a confusion. Miss Wilson is not here as my visitor, but as the legal advocate of a matter that deeply affects all of you. Harold laughed anxiously. Legal advocate? A woman of color with no training or credentials. Maxwell, have you entirely lost your sanity? Amara opened her document case systematically. Actually, Mr. Pierce, besides being a certified educator, I possess legal authority as a direct heir of Joseph Freeman. The name struck like thunder in the quiet hall. The elder faces became visibly pale. Joseph Freeman doesn't exist, Harold responded hastily. He's a folk tale. Interesting, Amara replied, extracting yellowed papers from her briefcase. Because I possess here the original title signed by the governor in 1866, granting Joseph Freeman, my great-grandfather, and a man liberated after the Civil War, the territory that today comprises approximately 60% of Riverbrook, including your shop, Mr. Pierce. Judge Thornton adjusted his spectacles to examine the papers Amara now displayed. This appears genuine. It's a fabrication, Harold screamed, but his voice shook. The supporting documentation is here, Amara continued, undisturbed, including the record of how Joseph Freeman was compelled to escape after attempted lynchings in 1870 and how the founding families distributed his land among themselves, establishing what they termed the Riverbrook Property Committee. Alexander then declared, the Maxwell Library maintains copies of all land documentation in the area. Peculiar how the specific 1870 to 1872 period was absent until Miss Wilson discovered cross-references in other papers. Reverend Miller, an aged man, lowered his head. My father referenced that story. He said it was a transgression buried deeply. We're not here to penalize the descendants for their ancestors' wrongdoings. Amara announced, I'm suggesting an agreement. The establishment of a community foundation that benefits all citizens of Riverbrook, especially for education and reasonable housing. Harold Pierce laughed nervously. That's ridiculous. Nobody will accept this performance. That was when Attorney Jeff, a respected tri-state lawyer, entered the hall. The documents have been confirmed by the State Historical Records Commission. They are legitimate, and I am pleased to notify you that the lawsuit has been officially submitted. The hall erupted in loud voices. Amid the chaos, Harold lunged angrily toward Amara. You orchestrated this from the start, he hissed. That's what you were concealing in your letters. Amara remained composed. No, Mr. Pierce. In the letters, I was simply a solitary woman seeking companionship. It was your immediate reaction of me when you saw me that made me understand what type of man you truly were. The type of man who would condemn my great-grandfather for the same reason you condemned me solely because of the color of our skin. You're going to destroy us, he whispered palely. No, she responded gently. I'm going to correct a historical injustice in the most equitable way possible for everyone. The distinction between us, Mr. Pierce, is that I encountered discrimination my entire existence, and yet I don't desire anyone to lose their residence. Not even you. As Harold Pierce collapsed into a chair, crushed, the city council retreated to consider Amara's proposal. Alexander approached her, admiration clear in his look. You could have demanded everything, he said quietly. And made myself exactly like those who robbed my great-grandfather, she replied. Justice isn't vengeance, Alexander. It's restoration. What nobody in that room could conceive as they observed the woman they had rejected and undervalued was that the genuine transformation of Riverbrook was just commencing. The message that would resonate through the halls of authority for generations to follow would not be about a woman who came to destroy, but about one who, even when injured, chose to rebuild with dignity and vision. And while Harold Pierce confronted the destruction of his reputation, Amara Wilson and Alexander Maxwell exchanged a glance that contained promises far beyond land and documents, a glance that spoke of a future where acceptance would no longer be a question of color, but of character. 6 months following that historic gathering at City Hall, Riverbrook had been transformed. The Freeman Foundation, established with funds recovered from historical injustice, was already financing scholarships for underprivileged youth and community improvement projects. At the heart of this transformation was Amara, not as a vindictive figure, but as a visionary who saw beyond the pain. Harold Pierce's former shop now contained Riverbrook's first public library. Ironically, a place where forgotten stories could finally be shared. Harold himself had departed town weeks after the revelation, selling his properties for a portion of their worth and leaving without farewell. Rumor suggested that he was employed as a clerk in a neighboring town, his pride diminished like his bank account. You could have ruined him completely, Alexander remarked one autumn afternoon as they walked through the gardens of her estate, now partially converted into a cultural center. Most people would have demanded every last cent. Amara smiled, observing children playing on lawns that had once been the exclusive domain of the elite. Revenge would have provided me satisfaction for a day. This, she gestured to the space around her, will provide us satisfaction for generations. News of the Freeman case had spread beyond Riverbrook, attracting journalists and historians interested in documenting similar cases of historical land injustice. Amara received invitations to speak at universities, sharing not only her personal story, but the legal methodology she had used to re-establish the truth. During a celebratory dinner in the main hall of the Maxwell Mansion, now officially named Freeman Maxwell House, after the discreet marriage of its owners, Judge Thornton raised his glass in an unexpected toast. To the woman who taught us that justice is not just a legal concept, but a daily practice, he declared, his voice breaking with genuine emotion. When Amara arrived in our town, We thought we knew exactly who she was based solely on her appearance. What a humbling and necessary lesson we learned. At his side, Martha Webb, now principal of the new community school, nodded vigorously. And to think it all started with a cruel rejection at the train station. Alexander took Amara's hand in his. The best decision Harold Pierce ever made was to reject you, he murmured with a smile. Although I doubt he would agree. In the old Central Square, where once only traditional families were celebrated, a new monument had been erected. Not a grand statue, but a simple bronze plaque telling the story of Joseph Freeman and how his unjustly taken land had finally returned to its purpose of serving the entire community. As night fell over Riverbrook, Amara watched the city lights from her new porch. She had arrived as a rejected danger, a black woman deemed unfit to belong. Now she was not only accepted, but respected, not for bowing to the expectations of others, but for standing firm in her principles. When Alexander joined her with 2 cups of tea, Amara reflected on the journey that had brought them there. You know what's ironic? She said. Harold rejected me because he couldn't imagine sharing his life with someone who didn't fit into his narrow worldview. In the end, that's exactly what destroyed him. While you thrived because of exactly what he despised. Your strength, your history, your truth, Alexander added. The lesson Riverbrook learned, and one that would echo for generations, was simple but profound. When we judge someone based on superficial characteristics, we not only deny their humanity, we blind ourselves to the extraordinary value they could bring to our lives. And as Amara Wilson Maxwell watched the moon rise over the city that had once rejected her, she knew that true revenge had never been about punishing Harold Pierce. It was about building something so beautiful, fair, and lasting that his rejection would become nothing more than a footnote in the much larger story that was being written. If this story of overcoming prejudice and achieving justice with dignity touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more inspiring stories that remind us that our differences are not obstacles, but sources of strength that can transform entire communities.